Hey guys, welcome to Conversations. I'm with my friend Kayle Mumby, and we are, well, actually, the first time we've done a Conversations together.
Yes, this is true.
First time you've been in the Streams offices, studios.
Yes.
But Streams...
It's a dream come true.
Awesome. Because Streams has some history. Like you have some history with John Paul Jackson, with Streams. Yeah. And so why don't we start out with that story? Like, what was your first time meeting or hearing, being around John Paul? I'll put it that way.
Yeah, the first time I was ever around John Paul, I was younger than I am now. But, oh man, it was 1997, if I got the dates right. And it was in February sometime. I can figure that out later. But February 1997. I had just met the Holy Spirit, which is a whole long story in itself. But I was like a kid in a candy store every time that somebody said anything spiritual or anything supernatural. So it was in Calgary, Alberta. I live in a city 4 hours north of there. So Calgary, Alberta, we heard that there was this man named John Paul Jackson. And this is my first time ever hearing that there was like a real life prophet that was going to be around. So I went down there so hungry and so excited. Go into this meeting and the worship's amazing and it's everything that I've been reading about on the internet. And this man walks up with, it looks like he was glowing, as you know. And that was one of the first times ever where I realized like the Jesus eyes. Everybody always said, when you meet this man, he's got the Jesus eyes going. So you could tell that with John Paul Jackson. So we get through the whole thing and there's two things that I remember in particular. Well, the first one was I couldn't understand his accent because I'm from Canada and I was young and he was going in there and he kept talking about this thing called Pensacola. And I had no idea that there was a Pensacola revival happening at the time. But this is a total aside from everything, but I think it's just a funny story. I kept thinking he was talking about Pepsi Cola. And I was just like, wow, there's a revival happening at the Pepsi Cola factory. And I truly didn't realize that until afterwards when I was talking to people about that. And they gave me the weirdest look. And they're like, Pensacola, Kayle. There's a Pensacola, Florida. So that's when I figured out there's a revival happening there too. But anyway, at the end of the meeting, it was just like the wild free-for-all when you're praying for people. And I can't really remember how it happened, but we were all up at the front and John was going around and he's picking people out and praying for them and all that. And so I was trying to like shimmy in to get prayed for because I was this super hungry young kid. And eventually he turned around and he grabbed me and he grabbed my hands and he started praying for me. And he gave me my first ever prophecy that I really ever remember. Wow. And he looked at me right in the eyes and he always said, son. He said, son, you are going to have a significant international ministry. So it'll be marked by signs and wonders. It'll be marked by healing. It'll be marked by the supernatural and corporate, what's the right word? Corporate experiences of heaven. Mm. He said it'll be marked by Bible teaching as well. And he prayed for that. And he said, you'll be used to father moves of God. I believe that's what he said at that time too. You'll be used to father moves of God around the world. And then he looked at me and said, money will never be an issue. You'll never have to worry about money. And then he paused and then he grabbed me by my hands again. And he said, son, oh, you'll be crushed. You'll be crushed. And that's how he ended. So it was like a great word of encouragement and then coupled with a word of discouragement, I guess. I don't know. But I didn't understand that then. I was too young. Well, I wasn't too young. I just had no vocabulary for it. Right. We are just now moving into the things of the Holy Spirit. But I will never, ever forget that. I still have the notes of that. It's at home right now. And I marked it February something or other, 1997, and wrote down those notes on there. Wow. And I knew after that, like we don't have time to, well, maybe we do have time to unpack the whole story. But I knew after that, I got my actual marching orders. It was more than just a dream, but now I know, okay, I believe in the prophetic. I'm going after the prophetic. And now I know that I actually have something I can use. Yeah. And finally, an outside person that I've never, ever met just confirmed the literal hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dreams and actual visions that I've had and put definition to it. Wow. So now I know, okay, this isn't just me having a vain dream. This is me knowing I think I was 14 years old at that time. This is me knowing I have a point to go after, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That was my first encounter with the man.
That's pretty amazing.
It was pretty crazy.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, just that whole thing about being crushed.
Yeah.
Just understanding the history, because now you've gone through some of the teachings, John Paul's.
Yeah.
And you have a grid for where he was coming from.
Yeah.
But
I've lived it.
And
Yay!
That's the fun. That's the other side of it. But the process of developing a gifting in someone, it usually comes through the process of crushing. But when we're young, we have no concept of that.
Yeah.
And I always meet these young prophetic people or these gifted people that are growing, and I always ask them just certain questions, because I'm trying to find out, have they been through dark night of the soul?
Yeah.
Have they been crushed? Because if not, I'm going to be really excited about their gifting, and I'm going to give them opportunity to minister, but I'm not going to trust them with authority.
Right.
Because until they've gone through that, they're going to go through it. And if they get something too early, then that crushing, they can end up pulling other people into it when they don't need to go through it.
Yep.
So,
and in some ways, I'm thankful for that. Like, sometimes I was like, I wanted to call that man up and be like, "You caused this, help me through it," you know. But at the same time, it gave me hope to go through the dark night of the soul.
Right.
You know, and some people know that story already. It's a literal 4 years of torturous hell that I went through. And I knew I would go back to that. I'd cry myself to sleep almost every single night, knowing what was going to happen. And I'd go back to that moment and say, no, there is a point. Yeah. There is a point. God didn't trick me. You know, neither did this man prophesy an actual curse over me. No, he actually gave me something which, if we frame it right, can pull us through the moments and make it worth it so that we can get to the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, because it wasn't just, oh, you're going to be crushed. No. It was, here's what God's going to do.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is going to happen.
Yeah, by the way, hold on tight.
Because it's almost like Jeremiah gets this call. Hey, you're going to speak to nations and nobody's going to like you. So set your face like flint, because they're all going to be against you. Like, great.
Yay!
But it was the hope of what God was going to do that gave him the strength to make it through those seasons and those times, which I love. Like that's so helpful. One, for somebody that has this prophetic word of destiny. If you see the crushing, don't be afraid to say it. Say it in the right way, because there is a right and wrong way. Yeah. But if you've given somebody destiny and you know that there's going to be difficulty, then give them both. Exactly. But if you see the difficulty, don't prophesy the difficulty unless you can prophesy the destiny on the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, don't just go up to some young kid and say, you're going to be crushed.
Like, great. Why?
Thanks. Like, you know, that's not fun.
Yeah, that's true.
Wow. Yeah. So then you had some other encounters with John Paul.
Yeah. I had one more with him. I traveled with Randy Clark. He picked me up and was my very first mentor, my very first spiritual father. And I started traveling with him when I was 17, which is hilarious. Like, we were just together a little while ago, and he looked at me and says, "What leader picks up a 17-year-old and travels him around the world?" And I'm like, I'm glad we were both so young and stupid. But man, like, that changed my life forever. But Randy, we would do a lot of stuff with the different prophets, because Randy, still to this day, he loves the prophets. Yeah. He has a huge conference called The Voice of the Prophets, which is a fun thing to minister at or go to. So I was so weird and so out there, and Randy is so much more of an apostle, teacher, healing. And then he's picked up this kid by the time I was 18 when I was traveling around with him, and he'd look at me and say, "I have no idea what to do with you." And I'm like, well, join the chorus of people who say that. So we'd be at all these conferences with the prophets and all that stuff. And he would literally go up to them and say, "I need an hour of your time." And he'd put me right in front of them and he goes, "Figure this kid out." And all the prophets would be like, "Oh, there's nothing to figure out. We love you." So you do that. And I spent time with John Paul Jackson. And I honestly don't even remember half the stuff he told me. But the one thing that I do remember, it was so marking for me, it was we were all at lunch. And for people who knew John Paul Jackson, he sometimes needed to retreat. Which would be funny when you're at lunch and everybody's wanting to talk to him. But I'd sit across the table from him, and I'll never forget it. He was just looking down, eating his lunch. And at that time, I had a rock solid belief that I was going to be a martyr. I wanted to be a martyr. I knew I was going to be a martyr. Like, this is the highest calling for Kayle Mumby's life, is to go somewhere and get killed. Which I suppose that's why we have inner healing. But, we worked that one out. So, but I knew I was going to be a martyr. And so John Paul Jackson was eating his lunch, and I reminded him of the thing in Calgary, and I don't think he remembered it all. So he had his head down like that, and all of a sudden he just slowly leans up and he looks at me with those eyes and he goes, "Son," he says, "you're going to have an unusually long life. And you're going to be used to father moves of God around the world." And then he goes back down to eat his lunch again. And so that's when I let go of the hope and the dream of becoming a martyr. So, okay, well, maybe I have my focus in the wrong place. And I literally, I reformatted my entire mode of living, my entire, the dreams that I was carrying and all that kind of stuff. And instead of wanting to be like a flash in the pan, I said, okay, I have to change this. And instead of playing the short game, I said, okay, I'm now going to play the long game for the rest of my life. Yeah. And that's an approach that I've now had for everything that I do, where I know there's a lot of opportunity. And sometimes people will go after that opportunity, and some people are supposed to because it's the right time. Yeah. But for me, I know that's how I phrase, or not phrase, that's the wrong way to say it. That's why I frame almost everything that I do is, am I playing the long game with this? Wow. Is there going to be fruit that's going to come from the choices that I make that I will be able to start harvesting 15 years from now? Because I know by that time I will be in a mature enough place to then move into the next 15 years and the next 15 years, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no,
it's a weird thing to think about. But I'm so glad. Those are the two quick words that he's ever given me. And I'm so glad he gave me those, because it helps frame what I do. It frames my thought process. It frames my planning. It frames the prophetic history around me. And it frames also the drive and the destination of what I'm going for.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That's amazing.
I'm so thankful for this man.
Yeah, me too. And I loved hearing the stories.
Yeah.
Because I get to travel in different places around the world, and I get to hear these stories of, John Paul prophesied over me. And I met somebody, 20-year-old kid, I think it was in Sweden, and he's telling me how he's the third of three brothers.
Wow.
And while his parents had the first two, he wasn't even conceived yet.
Crazy.
John Paul prophesies over them about their three kids.
Wow.
And gave prophetic words over all three of them. He wasn't even conceived yet.
That's crazy.
And every bit of it, both of his brothers were walking in it, and he was walking in exactly what John Paul said. And he just started walking in it 20 years. So it was like 23 years after the prophetic word.
That's crazy.
So 3 years before he's born, his destiny is being prophesied. He's stepping into it.
That's crazy.
Being able to hear stuff like that. And something inside of me says, Lord, I want to have those stories of somebody that I prophesied over that 30 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, they're going to be pointing back. And that word, it made no sense to me then. Yeah. But this is the fruit of it. Yeah. This is the fruit of it. And it's that long game kind of perception of
That's true.
Not wanting to be just that flash in the pan.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good.
It's fascinating.
It is.
I love the prophetic.
It's amazing. So for some reason I had this thought, and I'm going to hit something because I want to help people that are listening just to think more in a long-term mindset. I can remember in the first year that I was a Christian. I was at this church, and our pastor was a teacher. Like he was an amazing teacher.
Yeah.
And I actually reminded him of this a few years back. He can't even remember the message, but I can remember this message. I remember a lot of those messages for whatever reason. And one of them, he's talking about having a long-term mindset. And he says, grass can grow up, and in a year you've got fully mature grass, but the first storm and the first winter, that grass is gone, new grass has got to grow up. Yeah. But an oak tree, it takes a year before you can even tell something is growing.
Yeah.
And it can take 20, 30 years before it's mature. But a white oak can last like 500 years.
Right.
It can stay. And he goes, some of you've got callings from God, and you get to choose whether you're going to be the grass that grows up and you get it instantly, but you only last a season, or if you're willing to wait 20 years to become the man of God that can actually hold the destiny for the long term.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in that service and I'm like, God, if it takes me 20 years, just let me be the type of person that doesn't fall when they get it.
Right. Yeah.
And for somebody, it's only been saved for a year. Like, what a prayer to pray. But it was 20 years later that I was given the opportunity to take over Streams.
Yeah. It's crazy.
From that prayer.
That's wild.
20 years.
Yeah. I think we have to, like, for the church and for the people that are growing up in what is now a more common charismatic experience, because when I was young, it was brand new. Like, that was when the Toronto blessing was flowing through and all that kind of stuff. And what I've noticed is, like, what you're talking about, praying for the 20-year thing and all of that stuff, that hasn't been taught as much anymore, which in some ways it's very, very good, because we have to teach that everything is accessible now, but at the same time, the temperance of that. Yeah. And just like reflecting what you're saying, something that happened to me was somebody told me, it was clear that I was a prophet, which was bizarre. I still feel really, really weird about it, in all honesty. I'm just now starting to feel like I can wear that title, maybe, question mark, as I'm struggling to say it right now. But I think I was 16 years old. And people were seeing, like, the consistency of the supernatural encounter, the consistency of the accuracy and all that kind of stuff. And they told me, they said, get ready, because they said, in their opinion, it would be a minimum of 25 years of maturing before you actually could enter into that office. And I looked at them and I'm like, I'll prove you wrong. As if, like, don't you see the gifting? Don't you see the strength that I operate in? All that kind of stuff. And I never actually said it out loud, but that was honestly the thought in my heart. Yeah. And I'm like, whatever. Like, they have no faith. They have no blah, 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 all that stuff. And now, like, that was when I think I was 16, somewhere around there. I'm 37 years old now. And I'm now literally just saying, like, maybe a couple more years, Lord. Can I have some more time to cook this thing? Yeah. Even though I know now at 37, I feel like I'm just scratching the surface now of the calling of what I'm supposed to walk into. And it doesn't negate all the other time that I was going through, but it's just like, whoo, I think that person was right. Let's pray for that long game. And let's not be afraid to grow in a place of obscurity. Let's not be afraid to grow in a place of, your ministry might not be massive, but you might still have a ministry. Let's not be afraid to do that. Let's not be afraid to say that everything has to be on social media as we're doing an interview. But what I mean. Like, it's a different heart, and it's a different drive into it. And just reflecting on what you're saying, I think it's so important for people listening to this right now or watching it or whatever. 25 years isn't scary. No. 20 years isn't scary. Playing a long game isn't scary, and neither is it irresponsible. Sometimes the most responsible thing we can do is let something cook for a super long period of time. Yeah. Because, we could have operated well and gotten 500 people saved, but if you wait and wait and wait and wait and wait, you might operate well and save nations. Yes. I want to play a long game. Yeah. Yeah. I want to have that impact and let it last a long time, the long term. Exactly. For as much as at that time, I could say that prayer, and actually genuinely meant, like, don't let me get it soon. 20 years is great. Yeah, my prayer was opposite. I'm getting it now. Well, it's crushing.
A couple years later, I was not in that place. Yeah. A couple years later, I was like, all right, let's, And there were all these prophetic words that were coming out. And so this would have been late 90s, early 2000s, maybe right around between 99 to 2001, 2002. And I started hearing all these prophetic words about how that the time was short and God had accelerated things so much that what would have taken the previous generation, it was taking them 10 and 20 years to step into, God was going to be doing in 1 or 2 years because of the generation that was raising up. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that's me. Like, we're the generation, like God's accelerating everything. And what's hilarious? I've heard that same prophetic word. Wow. Every 10 years. Wow. Every 10 years, people start prophesying and saying, but what's funny is it still takes 20 years. Right. And I don't think it's actually a prophetic word that was inspired by God, but it was inspired by zeal. Huh. Yeah. And people seeing the potential and thinking, oh, well, this is going to happen so much sooner because, and we always have this tendency of thinking, well, we're the exception. I mean, the last generation, it took them a long time because, Yeah. I mean, it was the last generation, but we're, we're getting there. We're going to get there a little bit faster.
Yeah.
But it's still, it takes that long term. And we have this idea. It's like, well, if it's going to take that long to get there, like, do I have to wait that long before I do anything?
Yeah.
But that's not true.
That's not true at all.
Because it's the process of ministering. You minister the whole way.
Yes.
It's the ministry and the operation of the gift that actually causes the time to bring maturity.
Exactly.
It's not waiting and I'm not going to do anything until I'm ready.
Yep.
Well, you'll never do anything.
Yeah.
And so there's still fruitful ministry and there's still stuff that God does through us, even in the process.
Exactly. And the same thing happened with me. Like there's over 10 years where I did not promote. I didn't promote, not at all. And I'd go to like start a website or I'd go to make product and all that kind of stuff. And I would literally hear a couple of phrases. And one of the main phrases I heard was, Kayle, keep your head down. Keep your head down. So I did. And it was got a lot of controversy around that, not public controversy, but just like with my inner circle and stuff. You need to build all this stuff. But I knew just hide.
Yeah.
Let it cook. But I was still doing ministry all the way. And so it wasn't until 3 years ago, literally 3 years ago, that I made a website because Randy invited me to speak at the Voice of the Prophets. And he said, I'm not allowed to show up if I don't have a website. So I'm like, okay, well, pulling my cards there, And so I had to go and make a website. But it was the right timing then, and it was facilitating what was already happening. I was already traveling the planet, but hidden for the last 10 years. And now I have something that proves the track record of what I can now say God is doing through testimony. And it's not self-promotion. It's the right time.
Yes.
In accordance with all of my spiritual fathers, my spiritual mothers, with my close community. And we're not trying to drive anything. We're not trying to promote anything. We're saying this is what's happening now. And I have 10 years to prove it.
Yeah.
Of what happened in obscurity.
Yeah. And see, and that's one of the big differences because that, hidden in what you just said, there was a key that when it was the community around you and the people that God had entrusted to speak into your life, your mothers, your fathers, that were saying, okay, now's the time.
Yeah.
And
it was consistently, they're all saying, and it wasn't agenda driven.
Right.
And you could tell there's two different phrases because half of them were saying, do it, do it, do it. But you could tell it was an agenda, which isn't good or bad. It's just, that's the frame of it is. But then it was different. It's like, no, this is the Lord. And there's a holiness and there's an awe on it. So it was just a different thing. Just felt like, and we have to say that.
Yeah, no, that's key.
Yeah.
That's key because being able to discern the difference, but also realizing when it's our own heart that has the agenda that is trying to do it. And it's almost like, well, they're trying to hold me back.
Yeah.
And I need to step out because God's given me this great thing. And it's rebellion that actually causes us sometimes to push forward. And being able to recognize that difference. And one of the keys is that community, having a community around you. If you're having to step out and you don't have a community around you, it's dangerous.
Yeah, probably don't step out.
Yeah, no.
Please.
Yeah, well, and I remember years ago, and I remember at the time I was like, "What? That doesn't make any sense." But now I'm understanding it more and more. Yeah. I remember listening to tapes from the 80s and the 90s of Paul Cain giving a prophetic word, but him talking about there's some stuff that the Lord showed me that I'm supposed to release, but I can't release it because I don't have enough intercession.
Wow.
And I'm not willing to take the warfare to release this yet. Wow. And so when the intercession rises up, then I'll be able to release this revelation. And I'm thinking, like, if you've got a word from the Lord, just share the word from the Lord. Yeah. I'm a kid. I don't know anything. Yeah. But then you realize what that means to have a community and have people around you. And you look at somebody like, Paul Cain just passed away a month ago. And so this is kind of a fresh thing. And during that season in the 80s, 90s, when he was in the vineyard and he was in Kansas City, he had just come out of 20 years of hiddenness where he didn't have a community around him. So he didn't prophesy. He just prayed.
Right.
And he spent 20 years hidden, praying, taking care of his mom in Phoenix, Arizona.
Right. Yeah.
But when the Lord says, okay, here's a community. And so he moved to Kansas City because there was a community there. He gets to be a part of the community. And as they accept him as part of the community, then he starts to step out. And learning that timing by how God puts you into a place that provides a support.
Right.
Because without that support, it's dangerous. And well, Elijah didn't have support. Well, yes, he did.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes, he did. What the schools of the prophets, all these 5 cities that he would travel to that all had schools of the prophets. And we know that they were there because when they're getting ready to go across the Jordan for him to be taken up in the whirlwind, they're stopping at all these schools of the prophets because he's saying goodbye to his family.
Yeah.
He's saying goodbye to the people that had run with him, that had supported him, that were with them. And, I mean, he had one period in his life where he's like, I'm the only one. And God's like, basically, no, you're just dealing with depression.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not the only one. There's 3,000 others. But he already had the school of the prophets at that point.
Yeah.
And he just lost track of what was there.
Exactly.
But there was a community. Elisha has a community. The community is growing, and that community grew to such an extent. The community expanded and Elisha's reach expanded.
Exactly.
Elijah's reach was at this level. The community was at this level. But as the community around Elisha grows, the reach of Elisha grows. And we don't understand that dynamic very well in our society.
Sadly, no.
But we need to.
We have to. Not just need to, we have to.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to the gifts.
Yes.
So important.
It's really important. So good. Well, Kayle, it's great. And we're going to do some more conversations. So if you're watching this, keep your eye out because we'll let you know when the next one comes up. But man, thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
So good.